I watched the blood drain from Tyler's face as I slid the real estate closing documents across the polished granite counter. Our granite counter. The one I'd personally selected from that boutique stone gallery in Portland. His coffee mug stopped, halfway to his lips, and Vanessa's Instagram-perfect smile vanished in an instant. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from, and if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. "What is this?" Tyler finally managed, his voice barely above a whisper. I ran my fingers along the edge of the marble, savoring this moment I'd been planning for weeks. "It's the final closing statement," I said calmly. "Sandpiper Cove has new owners now. They're quite excited to take possession, which means you have exactly 48 hours to pack your things and leave." The text message had come at 2:36 a.m., 3 months earlier, jolting me awake in my rented downtown apartment. The harsh blue light illuminated the darkness, a digital intrusion into what had been a fitful sleep. Squinting at the screen, I saw it was from my brother Jackson. "Olivia, you need to see this. Now." Attached was a photo that cleared any remaining fog from my mind. It showed Tyler, my husband of 12 years, and Vanessa, his new executive assistant, standing arm in arm on the deck of our Sandpiper Cove beach house. Their faces were lit by the golden glow of sunset, champagne flutes raised in a toast. The caption on the Instagram post read, "New beginnings at our forever home. L'âme blessed, oceanfront living, one new chapter, our forever home." I sat up in bed, fully alert now, my heart hammering against my ribs. The Sandpiper Cove property wasn't just any beach house. It represented 5 years of my life, my dream, my project, my achievement. I'd discovered the neglected property during a solo trip along the Oregon coast, a weekend escape from the growing distance in my marriage. Where others saw a dilapidated eyesore, I recognized potential. The house had been built in the 1920s by a shipping magnate, once magnificent but fallen into disrepair after decades of neglect. The listing agent had almost apologized when showing it to me, pointing out the rotting deck boards, the water damage, the outdated electrical system. But standing in that cavernous living room with its wall of windows facing the Pacific, I could see what it could become. I'd used my inheritance from my grandmother, money that had been explicitly protected in our prenuptial agreement, to make the purchase. Tyler had been dismissive, calling it my midlife crisis project, even though I was only 34 at the time. "It'll be a money pit," he'd warned, barely glancing at the photos I'd excitedly shown him. "But if this is what you need to do, go ahead. Just don't expect me to spend my weekends driving 3 hours to watch you play Bob Vila." His indifference had stung, but it didn't diminish my enthusiasm. In truth, there was something liberating about pursuing this vision without his half-hearted support. The beach house became my refuge, my creative outlet, my proof that I could see potential and bring it to life. For 2 years, I'd spent nearly every weekend at Sandpiper Cove, overseeing contractors during major structural work and handling smaller projects myself. I learned to refinish hardwood floors, to select period-appropriate fixtures, to balance preservation with modernization. Tyler rarely visited, always finding excuses. Work emergencies, golf tournaments, networking events that somehow became more frequent as my absences from our city life grew more regular. I'd been naive enough to interpret his lack of interest as merely different priorities, not recognizing it as the growing chasm it truly was. By the time the renovation was complete, the distance between us had become an unbridgeable gulf, though I hadn't been ready to acknowledge it. And now, staring at that photo in the darkness of my rented apartment, I felt a strange clarity descend. Tyler had never appreciated what I'd built at Sandpiper Cove. He'd never understood why I'd invested so much of myself in rescuing and transforming that neglected property. To him, it had always been just another asset, a line item on our net worth statement. But to see him there with Vanessa, claiming it as their forever home, that was a different kind of betrayal. It wasn't just that he was with another woman, it was that he was appropriating my creation, my achievement, as a backdrop for his new relationship. I scrolled back through Jackson's messages, finding another photo from Vanessa's Instagram story. This one showed Tyler uncorking champagne in the kitchen I'd meticulously designed, with its handcrafted cabinets and vintage chandelier from that salvage yard in Seattle. Living the dream in our coastal paradise. The caption read, followed by a string of heart emojis. Our. The presumption was breathtaking. I thought of the weekends I'd spent stripping decades of paint from the original wainscoting, the hours I'd invested researching period-appropriate color schemes, the satisfaction I'd felt watching the house transform from a neglected relic to a home that honored its history while embracing the present. My phone buzzed with another message from Jackson. "You okay, sis? Should I come over?" I typed back quickly. "No, I'm fine, going back to sleep. Talk tomorrow." It was a lie, of course. There would be no more sleep tonight. Instead, I switched on the lamp and reached for my laptop. If Tyler thought he could simply move his mistress into my beach house without consequences, he had severely misjudged the situation. Opening my password manager, I navigated to the folder labeled Properties and found the document I needed, the full legal record for Sandpiper Cove, including the detailed ownership arrangement I'd established when purchasing it. Tyler's name appeared nowhere on these documents. The beach house had been bought entirely with my separate property funds, a fact I'd been transparent about from the beginning. What Tyler had apparently forgotten, or perhaps never bothered to understand, was that I'd structured the ownership through a limited liability company, Coastal Heritage Preservation LLC, of which I was the sole member. It was a setup my financial advisor had recommended for liability protection, given the extensive renovation work planned. Tyler had signed acknowledgments of this arrangement, probably without reading them fully, dismissing them as more of my excessive paperwork, as he liked to call my thoroughness. I opened another folder containing the prenuptial agreement we'd signed before our wedding. Tyler had been the one to suggest a prenup, ironically. As the rising star in his investment firm with family money behind him, he'd wanted to protect his assets and future earnings. I'd agreed readily, having watched my own parents' messy divorce in my teens. What Tyler hadn't anticipated was that I would insist on equally clear protections for my own assets, including any properties purchased with my separate funds. My fingers hovered over the keyboard as I contemplated my next move. The lawyer in me, I'd practiced family law for 8 years before transitioning to corporate work, knew that I had legal grounds to demand Tyler and Vanessa vacate the property immediately. The wife in me felt a complicated mix of hurt, betrayal, and surprisingly, relief. The distance that had grown between us finally had a name, a face, an explanation. But beneath both those identities was a deeper sense of self that had been reawakened during the Sandpiper Cove renovation. A woman who valued creation over acquisition, substance over appearance, authenticity over pretense. That was the part of me that felt most violated by Tyler and Vanessa's presumptuous occupation of the space I'd poured my heart into. I closed the laptop and walked to the window of my downtown apartment, looking out at the city skyline. 3 months ago, Tyler had suggested we take some space, claiming we'd grown too different, that we wanted different things from life. He'd presented it as a mutual decision, a mature recognition of our evolution as individuals. I'd agreed, partly because I'd sensed the futility of fighting for a marriage that had already withered, partly because I'd been trained by years of legal practice to choose negotiation over confrontation when possible. Now I understood that taking space had merely been cover for his relationship with Vanessa. The realization should have hurt more than it did. Instead, I felt an odd sense of clarity, as if pieces of a puzzle were finally coming together. My phone buzzed again. Another message from Jackson. Forgot to mention. Saw them at Carson's Grill. Last week, too. Everyone's talking. Sorry, sis. So it wasn't just a weekend getaway. They were openly together in our social circle, making appearances at local haunts, generating gossip, and now they were claiming Sandpiper Cove as their forever home. I returned to bed, though not to sleep. Instead, I began making mental notes, formulating a strategy. By the time dawn broke over the city, casting long shadows across my temporary dwelling, I had the outline of a plan. The first call I made that morning was to Meredith Woodson, my former law school roommate who had gone on to become one of the city's most respected real estate attorneys. "Olivia Lawrence? Welk, this is a blast from the past," Meredith said when she picked up. "How long has it been?" "Too long," I admitted. "Listen, I need some advice. Professional advice. Do you have time for coffee today?" 2 hours later, we were seated at a quiet corner table in a cafe far from my usual haunts, far from anywhere Tyler might frequent. I'd brought my laptop and a folder of documents, the Sandpiper Cove ownership records, the prenuptial agreement, the LLC formation papers. Meredith reviewed them methodically, her expression revealing nothing as she scanned page after page. Finally, she looked up, removing her reading glasses. "Well, the good news is that your ownership of the property appears rock solid. The prenup is clear about separate property remaining separate, and you've maintained excellent documentation of the purchase, using your inheritance funds. The LLC structure adds another layer of protection." I nodded, having expected this confirmation. "And if I wanted to sell the property, would I need Tyler's consent given our current separation?" A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. Meredith's eyebrows rose slightly. "Based on these documents? No. The property is held by your LLC, not jointly. Tyler has no ownership interest to convey. But Olivia..." She leaned forward, lowering her voice. "Are you sure selling is what you want? This house clearly means a lot to you." It was a fair question, one I'd wrestled with through the sleepless night. The beach house represented countless hours of work, of vision, of creative expression. It had been my sanctuary during the slow, unacknowledged dissolution of my marriage. Selling it felt like giving up a piece of myself, but keeping it meant an ongoing connection to Tyler, potential legal battles, the possibility of watching him and Vanessa create their forever in the space I'd lovingly restored. More importantly, it meant remaining tethered to the past when everything in me was yearning for a fresh start. "I'm sure," I said firmly, "but I don't want a conventional listing. I need something discreet, something that can happen quickly, without Tyler finding out until it's too late for him to interfere." Meredith studied me for a moment. "I know someone who might be able to help with that. Angela Reeves specializes in private real estate transactions. She has a network of high-net-worth clients who often prefer to buy without the property ever hitting the market. It's all above board, just selective." As Meredith pulled out her phone to make the introduction, I felt the first stirring of something I hadn't experienced in months, perhaps years. Not happiness exactly, but purpose, direction. The sense of taking control of my narrative after too long allowing it to be written by others. By the end of the week, I'd met with Angela Reeves, a poised, efficient woman who'd listened to my situation without judgment and promised to find the right buyer for Sandpiper Cove. She'd arranged for a discreet appraisal when Tyler and Vanessa were known to be away, the appraiser presenting himself as a routine insurance inspector, if anyone happened to notice. "The market for unique coastal properties like this is extremely strong right now," Angela had told me after reviewing the appraisal, "especially for homes with character and history. Your renovation work has substantially increased the value. I have several clients who would be very interested. How quickly could we close?" I'd asked. "With the right buyer and a cash offer?" 2 weeks, maybe less. 2 weeks to erase what had taken years to create. It should have felt more painful than it did. Instead, I experienced a strange lightness, as if I were cutting away ballast that had been weighing me down. In the midst of these preparations, Tyler reached out for the first time in weeks. His text was casual, almost breezy, as if we were merely busy friends who'd fallen out of touch. We should talk about dividing the properties. V and I would like to make Sandpiper Cove our primary residence. You can keep the city condo. It suits your lifestyle better anyway. My lifestyle. As if my preference for thoughtful restoration over flashy displays was something to be dismissed. As if the woman who had transformed a derelict historical property into a showcase home was somehow less deserving of it than the man who could barely locate the circuit breaker panel. I didn't respond. Let him interpret my silence however he wished. In reality, I was too busy reviewing offers that Angela had begun collecting. 3 serious buyers had emerged, all willing to pay well above the appraised value, all able to close quickly with minimal contingencies. One offer stood out, from a retired literature professor and her wife, a marine biologist. Their letter expressed appreciation for the historical elements I'd preserved, the environmental considerations I'd incorporated into the renovation, the balance I'd struck between honoring the past and embracing the future. They weren't looking for a status symbol or an investment property. They wanted a home, a place to write and research and grow old together. "This is the one," I told Angela when she called to review the offers. "Even if it's not the highest. It's only $15,000 below the top offer," Angela assured me. "And they're flexible on the closing timeline. We could have papers ready to sign in 10 days. 10 days. It seemed both an eternity and an instant. But I knew from years of legal practice that timing could be everything in negotiations. I needed to coordinate the closing carefully to ensure that Tyler and Vanessa would be at Sandpiper Cove when I arrived with the news, but not so far in advance that Tyler might somehow catch wind of the transaction. Through Jackson's reluctant reconnaissance, he hated being my spy but hated Tyler's behavior more. I learned that they were planning a small dinner party at the beach house the following weekend. "Some kind of housewarming thing," Jackson reported. "Vanessa's been posting about table settings and signature cocktails. A housewarming, for a home they didn't own. The audacity was almost admirable." "Perfect," I said. "That's when we'll close." The days that followed passed in a blur of paperwork, wire transfers, and final preparations. I visited Sandpiper Cove one last time when I knew it would be empty, walking through each room to say goodbye. In the primary bedroom with its panoramic ocean view, I ran my hand along the wall I'd painted myself, 3 coats of a custom mixed blue that captured the color of the sea at dawn. In the living room, I stood before the fieldstone fireplace whose mortar I'd carefully restored, using techniques researched in historical renovation journals. Each space held memories of discovery, of challenge, of satisfaction in bringing something beautiful back to life. But as I made my final circuit of the property, I realized that the skills and confidence I'd gained during the renovation couldn't be sold along with the house. Those would remain mine, ready to be applied to new projects, new challenges, new beginnings. On the day of the closing, I dressed with care, a tailored navy suit that conveyed both authority and restraint, pearl earrings that had belonged to my grandmother, whose inheritance had made Sandpiper Cove possible. As I prepared to leave my apartment, a text arrived from Jackson. "Party in full swing, 6 cars in the driveway." "Are you sure about this?" I was sure, not in the heat of anger or revenge, but with the cool certainty that comes from knowing you're finally acting in alignment with your truest self. "I'm sure," I texted back. "See you tomorrow for brunch." The closing itself was anticlimactic. Signatures exchanged, funds transferred, keys handed over. The new owners, Elizabeth and Catherine, thanked me with genuine warmth, sharing plans for the writing studio they envisioned creating in what had been the sunroom. Their excitement was contagious, their appreciation for what I'd built reassuring. Sandpiper Cove would be loved, would continue to evolve in hands that understood its value. By late afternoon, I was driving along the coastal highway, the closing, documents in a leather portfolio on the passenger seat beside me. The ocean appeared and disappeared from view as the road wound its way toward Sandpiper Cove. No, not Sandpiper Cove anymore. Not mine anymore. That chapter was closed. But there remained one final scene to play out, one moment of truth that couldn't be avoided. As I rounded the last curve and the house came into view, I saw the collection of cars parked haphazardly in the driveway and along the private road. Music drifted from the open windows, along with the sound of laughter and conversation. A housewarming. Indeed. I parked behind Tyler's Range Rover, gathered the portfolio, and made my way to the front door. No need to knock. This celebration was about to take an unexpected turn. Stepping into what had once been my creation, I found myself momentarily disoriented. The furniture had been rearranged, new art hung on walls I'd carefully painted, different. Textiles draped over chairs I'd thoughtfully selected. It was like seeing a familiar face with unfamiliar expressions, recognizable, but wrong somehow. I moved through the entry hall toward the sound of voices, finding the gathering in the expansive kitchen and dining area. Tyler stood at the island, our island, the one I'd personally selected from that boutique stone gallery in Portland, pouring wine for a half-dozen guests. Vanessa was arranging canapés on a platter, her back to me, unaware of my presence. Sudden hush fell over the room as one guest, then another, noticed me standing in the doorway. Tyler looked up, his face registering first surprise, then wariness, then an attempt at casual control. "Olivia," he said, his voice overly loud, compensating for the awkwardness of the moment. "This is unexpected." Vanessa turned, her perfect features arranging themselves into a mask of polite neutrality that didn't quite hide her annoyance at the interruption. "I'm sorry to intrude on your housewarming," I said, moving fully into the room. "But there's something urgent we need to discuss." And that's when I slid the closing documents across the polished granite counter, watching the blood drain from Tyler's face as realization dawned. "What is this?" Tyler finally managed, his voice barely above a whisper. I ran my fingers along the edge of the marble, savoring this moment I'd been planning for weeks. "It's the final closing statement," I said calmly. "Sandpiper Cove has new owners now. They're quite excited to take possession, which means you have exactly 48 hours to pack your things and leave." Vanessa abandoned her carefully arranged canapés, moving to stand beside Tyler. "This is some kind of joke, right?" She flashed the patronizing smile she'd probably used countless times to diffuse tense situations in the office. "I assure you, it's not," I replied, opening the portfolio to withdraw additional documentation. "The property has been sold to Elizabeth and Catherine Parker. The transaction was completed this afternoon. Here's the deed transfer, property tax reassignment, and utility transfer forms. Everything's been filed with the county recorder's office." Tyler's facade of confident control collapsed entirely, replaced by a blend of confusion and rising anger. He snatched the papers, flipping through them with increasing agitation. "You can't do this," he sputtered, looking up at me with disbelief. "This is our home. You can't just sell it without telling me." The guests, who had been frozen in awkward silence, began discreetly gathering their belongings, recognizing that the evening's entertainment had taken an unexpected turn. A middle-aged woman I recognized as Tyler's colleague from his investment firm murmured something about giving you two some privacy as she edged toward the door. Within minutes, only Tyler, Vanessa, and I remained in the suddenly cavernous kitchen. The half-prepared housewarming spread lay abandoned on the countertop, champagne losing its fizz, canapés curling at the edges, celebration deflated before it had properly begun. "You had no right," Tyler said, his voice low and dangerous now, that the audience had departed. "This property is marital assets. You've broken about a dozen laws." There it was, the confident, authoritative tone he used when explaining financial matters to clients, the voice that had once made me feel protected, but now rang hollow with unearned certainty. "Actually, I haven't broken any laws," I corrected, Him, keeping my voice level. Sandpiper Cove was purchased entirely with my inheritance, which is explicitly protected as separate property in our prenuptial agreement. The deed was held by my LLC, not jointly. Your name isn't on any of the ownership documents. Vanessa, who had been watching this exchange with a growing alarm, placed a steadying hand on Tyler's arm. There must be some kind of review period, she suggested. We can get the sale reversed. I almost admired her determination to salvage the situation. The sale is final, I informed them both. Cash transaction, no contingencies, all documents properly executed and filed. The new owners will be taking possession the day after tomorrow. Tyler's face flushed deep red, a vein pulsing at his temple. This is about revenge, he accused. You're doing this to punish me for moving on. The suggestion was so fundamentally misguided that I almost laughed. This wasn't about revenge. It was about liberation. But Tyler's narcissism wouldn't allow him to see that distinction. This isn't about you, Tyler, I said quietly. It's about me finally recognizing that some things can't be fixed or saved. Our marriage is one of those things. Sandpiper Cove is another. You loved this place, he argued, his tone shifting toward incredulity. You spent years working on it. You chose every paint color, every fixture, every piece of furniture. It was the most recognition he'd ever given to my investment in the property, and it came only when he realized it was slipping from his grasp. The irony wasn't lost on me. Yes, I did, I acknowledged, and now I'm choosing to let it go. The new owners will appreciate what I created here. They'll honor the house's history and character in ways you never understood. Vanessa had moved to the wall of windows overlooking the ocean, her back to us, arms wrapped tightly around herself. What about our things? She asked without turning. We've moved everything here. Your personal belongings can be removed within 48 hours, I stated. Anything that was part of the original property or purchased specifically for it stays. That includes all furniture, artwork, and fixtures that were present when you arrived. This is insane, Tyler muttered, running his hands through his hair in frustration. We had plans for this place. We were going to update it, modernize it, and make it more livable. His words felt like a slap. The thought of them updating, my carefully curated restoration, replacing period-appropriate elements with trendy disposable alternatives, only confirmed that I'd made the right decision. The time for those plans has passed, I said simply. I recommend you start packing instead. As I turned to leave, Tyler made one final desperate attempt. I'll fight this, Olivia. I'll get a lawyer. This sale won't stand up in court. I paused, in the doorway, turning back to face him. By all means, consult an attorney. Have them review our prenuptial agreement, specifically Article 4 regarding separate property. Have them examine the LLC operating agreement you signed acknowledging my sole ownership of Sandpiper Cove. Have them explain the concept of sole and separate property under state law. My years as a lawyer had taught me the value of thorough documentation, of attention to detail, of anticipating potential challenges. Tyler had always found these qualities tedious, even obsessive. Now they were my strongest armor. While you're consulting legal experts, I continued, you might also inquire about the implications of unauthorized occupancy and potential damages for any alterations made to the property without the owner's consent. Vanessa turned from the window, her composure cracking. You can't just throw us out, she protested. Where are we supposed to go? I shrugged, gathering my portfolio. That's not my concern. Perhaps you should have thought about living arrangements before claiming someone else's property as your forever home. As I walked toward the door, Tyler called out after me, his voice raw with a mix of anger and dawning realization. This isn't over, Olivia. I didn't bother responding. Some statements didn't require rebuttal. Their hollowness was self-evident. Outside, the evening had turned cool, sea mist rolling in from the ocean. shrouding the landscape in ethereal white. I stood for a moment on the porch, breathing in the salt air, listening to the rhythmic crash of waves against the shore below. For 5 years, this view, this sound, this sensation had been my touchstone, my connection to something larger and more enduring than the day-to-day complications of modern life. But now, rather than feeling loss, I experienced a surprising lightness. The beauty remained, but the attachment had diminished, replaced by something more valuable: the recognition of my own resilience, my capacity for growth, my ability to release what no longer served me. My phone buzzed with a text from Meredith. How did it go? I smiled, looking back at the house where raised voices could still be heard through the partially open windows. Exactly as expected, I replied. They're packing as we speak. The drive back to the city that night was different from any previous journey along that winding coastal road. Each curve, each vista felt like a farewell, but not a sorrowful one. Rather, it was the kind of goodbye one offers to a chapter that has served its purpose, appreciative but ready to turn the page. Back in my apartment, I poured a glass of wine and stepped onto the small balcony overlooking the city. The urban landscape spread before me, lights twinkling in the darkness, so different from the natural rhythms of the coast. Yet it held its own kind of beauty, its own possibilities. My phone rang, Jackson calling for an update. Is it done? He asked without preamble. It's done, I confirmed. Sale closed today. I delivered the news personally, he whistled. Wish I could have seen Tyler's face. What did he say? About what you'd expect. Denial, anger, threats of legal action. Will he have any grounds to contest the sale? I took a sip of wine, considering the question. No, I made sure of that. The property was mine to sell and I sold it legally. His threats are empty. And how are you feeling? Jackson's tone softened, brotherly concern replacing legal curiosity. It was a fair question, one I hadn't fully examined in the rush of planning and execution. How did I feel about selling a property I'd poured so much of myself into? About closing the door on a place that had represented possibility and personal achievement? Lighter, I said finally. Like I've put down something I've been carrying for too long. No regrets? I gazed out at the city skyline, at the future stretching before me, unwritten and full of potential. No regrets. The next morning brought a flurry of messages from Tyler, alternating between legal threats and emotional appeals. I read them without responding, recognizing them as the desperate attempts of someone unaccustomed to having boundaries enforced. This sale is fraudulent. My lawyer will be contacting you. How could you do this to us? After 12 years of marriage, we need to talk. This can still be resolved amicably. I'll offer the new owners 20% above what they paid. Name your price to make this go away. Each message revealed more about Tyler's inability to accept the new reality, his belief that everything, even legal property transfers, could be negotiated, manipulated, or purchased if one applied enough pressure or money. By midday, the tone of his texts had shifted again, this time to anger tinged with accusation. You've been planning this for months, haven't you? This whole separation was just to set me up. The irony of him accusing me of deception was almost amusing. I finally responded to that particular message with a simple truth. The separation was your idea, Tyler. I've simply been dealing with the consequences. His reply came instantly. By selling our beach house out from under me? My beach house, I corrected. Purchased with my inheritance, renovated with my time and vision, legally owned by my LLC. The property was never ours in any legal sense. It was our weekend getaway for years, he protested. Our special place. This revision of history was so blatant that it demanded a response. You visited 6 times in 5 years, Tyler. Each time you spent most of the weekend on conference calls or complaining about the spotty cell service. The last time you were there, before moving Vanessa in. You left early because you couldn't stand another night listening to those damn waves. There was a long pause before his next message appeared. People change. I've changed. I appreciate. Sandpiper Cove now? Yes, I replied. You appreciate it now that someone else has made it beautiful. Now that it represents status rather than work. Now you can use it to impress your new girlfriend. But appreciation without understanding the value of what you're appreciating isn't real. It's just consumption. His response was immediate and defensive. What is that supposed to mean? It means you never saw Sandpiper Cove for what it was. A piece of history worth preserving. A structure with integrity and character. You saw it as a possession, something to be acquired and displayed. That's why it was so easy for me to let it go. The new owners will love it for the right reasons. After that exchange, Tyler's messages stopped abruptly. I imagined him and Vanessa frantically packing, their forever home dreams disintegrating before they'd fully formed. Part of me recognized the pain in that collapse, the disorientation of having one's expectations suddenly upended. But a larger part remembered the shock of seeing them claim my creation as their own. The casual entitlement with which they'd appropriated my years of work. Late that afternoon, my phone rang with a call from an unfamiliar number. Against my better judgment, I answered. Hello? Is this Olivia Lawrence? A woman's voice, professional but with an edge of uncertainty. Yes, who's calling? This is Diana Ellis. I'm an attorney representing Tyler Mitchell in regard to the Sandpiper Cove property. So, Tyler had made good on his threat to seek legal counsel. I wasn't surprised, though I wondered what angle they thought they could pursue. I see, I responded neutrally. What can I help you with, Ms. Ellis? My client believes the recent sale of the property was conducted without proper notification or consent. He's prepared to contest the transaction on those grounds. I switched into lawyer mode automatically, my voice cooling several degrees. Before we proceed, Ms. Ellis, I should inform you that I'm also an attorney, though I'm not currently practicing. I'm familiar with property law, particularly as it relates to marital assets and separate property designations. There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. I wasn't aware of your legal background, Ms. Lawrence. Understandable. Now, regarding your client's concerns, Sandpiper Cove was purchased entirely with funds explicitly designated as my separate property in our prenuptial agreement. The property was held by Coastal Heritage Preservation LLC, of which I am the sole member. Your client has no ownership interest in the property and therefore no legal standing to contest its sale. Another pause, longer this time. I could almost hear her mentally recalibrating her approach. My client maintains that regardless of the technical ownership structure, the property functioned as a marital asset and should be subject to equitable distribution in the divorce proceedings. It was a weak argument, and we both knew it. The prenuptial agreement specifically addresses this scenario, Ms. Ellis. Article 4, Section 3 states that properties purchased with separate funds remain separate property regardless of occasional use by the non-owning spouse. Your client signed this agreement after review by his own counsel. I could practically see her flipping through the prenup, searching for a loophole or exception that didn't exist. Furthermore, I continued, your client has been separated from me for 3 months, during which time he moved another woman into a property he had no legal right to occupy. This unauthorized use constitutes trespassing and could potentially expose him to claims for damages if the property had been harmed during his occupancy. Ms. Lawrence, Diana Ellis began, her tone shifting toward conciliation. Litigation benefits no one in this situation. My client is willing to negotiate in good faith to resolve this matter without court involvement. There's nothing to negotiate. Ms. Ellis, the property has been sold to third-party buyers in a legal, properly documented transaction. The deed has been transferred. Your client has been given 48 hours to remove his personal belongings, which is generous considering the circumstances. And if he refuses to vacate? Then the new owners would be within their rights to have him removed as a trespasser, with all the legal consequences that entails. I've advised them of the situation, and they're prepared to take appropriate action, if necessary. This wasn't entirely true. I hadn't yet informed Elizabeth and Catherine about the potential complication, hoping Tyler would see reason before it came to that. But Diana Ellis didn't need to know this. "I see," she said after a moment. "I'll discuss these points with my client and advise him accordingly." "That would be wise," I agreed. "And Ms. Ellis? You might want to review the prenuptial agreement thoroughly before pursuing this matter further. Paragraph 22 includes a provision requiring the losing party in any dispute to pay the prevailing party's legal fees." After ending the call, I sat, for a moment, mentally reviewing our exchange. Diana Ellis had seemed competent, but was clearly working with incomplete information. Tyler had probably presented the situation in the most favorable light possible, omitting crucial details about the property's ownership structure and his own actions. I considered calling Elizabeth and Catherine to warn them about the potential drama, but decided to wait another day. The 48-hour window I'd given Tyler and Vanessa wouldn't expire until tomorrow evening. There was still time for them to accept reality and depart peacefully. My phone chimed with a text from Jackson. "Just drove by Sandpiper Cove, moving truck in the driveway. Looks like they're actually leaving." I felt a wave of relief, tinged with a hint of sadness that surprised me. Not regret, I remained confident in my decision to sell the property, but a certain wistfulness for what might have been in a different life, with a different partner, one who shared my values rather than merely tolerating them. "Good," I texted back. "Let me know if you see anything concerning." Jackson's response came quickly. "Will do. Proud of you, sis. Standing your ground isn't always easy, but it's always worth it." His words resonated more deeply than he could know. For years, I'd compromised in small ways, accommodating Tyler's preferences, adapting to his vision of our life together. The renovation of Sandpiper Cove had been my first real assertion of independence within our marriage, my declaration that some things mattered enough to fight for, even if that meant standing alone. Selling the property might seem like surrendering that hard-won ground, but it was actually the opposite. A recognition that I no longer needed a physical structure to embody my values or validate my vision. I could carry those forward into whatever came next. As twilight descended over the city, I found myself thinking not about what I'd lost, but about what I'd gained. Clarity, confidence, a renewed sense of agency. The house had served its purpose in my life, teaching me what I was capable of creating when I trusted my own judgment. Now it was time to apply those lessons to building something new, not a structure of wood and stone and glass, but a life defined by authenticity rather than appearance, substance rather than status, creation rather than consumption. I picked up my phone and composed a message to Elizabeth and Catherine. The current occupants should be vacating the property by tomorrow evening. I wanted to let you know that you might encounter some resistance, though I hope that won't be the case. If there are any issues with the transition, please contact me immediately. Their response came within minutes. Thank you for the heads up. We're still scheduled to arrive the day after tomorrow, so excited to begin this new chapter. Your restoration work is truly inspirational. We promise to honor what you've created while making our own gentle contributions to the home's ongoing story. Reading their words, I felt the last lingering doubts about my decision dissolve. Sandpiper Cove would continue to evolve in hands that understood its value, appreciated its character, recognized the thought and care that had gone into its restoration. Some endings were really beginnings in disguise. This was one of them. For the house, for its new owners, and most importantly, for me. The next morning, I woke before dawn, my mind already cycling through potential scenarios for the day ahead. Would Tyler and Vanessa vacate Sandpiper Cove peacefully? Would there be another round of legal threats? Had I overlooked something crucial in my planning? I made coffee and carried it to the small balcony of my apartment, watching as the first hints of sunrise painted the city skyline in shades of pink and gold. From here, I couldn't see the ocean, couldn't hear the rhythmic crash of waves that had become the soundtrack to my weekends at Sandpiper Cove. Yet I found I didn't miss it as much as I'd expected. My phone buzzed with a message from Angela Reeves, the real estate agent who had facilitated the sale. Final walkthrough with Elizabeth and Catherine scheduled for tomorrow at 10 a.m. Any updates on the current occupants? I texted back. Appears they're in the process of moving out. We'll confirm by this evening. The reality of the situation was still sinking in. I had sold Sandpiper Cove. The property that had consumed so much of my time, energy, and creativity over the past 5 years now belonged to someone else. I should have felt a profound sense of loss, but instead, I experienced a curious blend of melancholy and liberation. My coffee finished, I showered and dressed for the office. Though I'd taken a personal day yesterday to handle the closing, I couldn't afford to miss any more work, especially with the financial uncertainties of divorce looming on the horizon. As a corporate counsel for a healthcare technology company, my job provided both stability and intellectual challenge, qualities I'd come to value more highly in recent months. At the office, I immersed myself in contract reviews and compliance issues, grateful for work that demanded my full attention. It wasn't until my lunch break that I checked my phone again, finding 3 missed calls from Tyler and a single text message. We need to talk about this. In person. Meet me at Westlake. Coffee at 6. I weighed my options carefully. On one hand, further interaction with Tyler seemed unlikely to be productive. On the other, establishing clear communication now might prevent complications later in the divorce proceedings. I'll be there at 6:15, I replied. I can spare 30 minutes. The afternoon crawled by, each hour weighted with anticipation. By 5:30, I was too distracted to be effective, so I packed up my materials and headed for Westlake Coffee, a neutral location downtown that we'd occasionally frequented during our marriage. Tyler was already there when I arrived at 6:12, seated at a corner table with 2 cups in front of him. He'd ordered my usual, an Americano with room for cream. The small gesture of familiarity struck me as both thoughtful and manipulative, reminding me of shared history while attempting to create a sense of intimacy that no longer existed. Thank us. You for coming, he said as I took the seat across from him. He looked tired, the usual polish of his appearance slightly diminished. Hair less perfectly styled, the collar of his dress shirt wrinkled, dark circles under his eyes. What did you want to discuss? I kept my tone neutral, businesslike. He took a sip of his coffee, buying time. I spoke with Diana Ellis this morning. She says you're on solid legal ground with the sale. Yes. Why didn't you tell me you were planning to sell? The question contained equal parts genuine confusion and accusation. We could have discussed it like reasonable people. The same way you discussed moving Vanessa into Sandpiper Cove, I countered. Or the way you discussed taking space before starting a relationship with your assistant? He had the grace to look uncomfortable. That's different. Is it? You made unilateral decisions that affected me. I made a unilateral decision regarding property that legally belonged to me. The parallel seems apt. Tyler leaned forward, lowering his voice. Look, Olivia, I know I handled things badly. The situation with Vanessa, it wasn't planned. It just happened. Affairs rarely are planned, Tyler. They're just permitted. I took a careful sip of the Americano, which was exactly how I liked it. But that's not why we're here. You wanted to talk about Sandpiper Cove. He nodded, seemingly relieved to return to the topic at hand. I've been thinking about what you said about me not appreciating the property for the right reasons. You're not entirely wrong. This admission, however partial, surprised me. Tyler rarely acknowledged being wrong about anything. When you first bought that place, I thought it was a waste, he continued. A dilapidated old house that would drain our finances and consume your weekends. I didn't understand why you were so attracted to it. No, you didn't, I agreed quietly. But spending time there these past few weeks, seeing what you created. He trailed off, searching for words. It's special, Olivia. What you did with that house is remarkable. The way the spaces flow together, the materials you selected, the details most people wouldn't even notice. It's not just a renovation. It's a work of art. His words stirred something unexpected within me. Not gratification at his belated recognition, but a poignant awareness of how different our experience at Sandpiper Cove had been. While I'd been immersed in the creative process, finding joy in the gradual transformation of neglected spaces into something beautiful and harmonious, Tyler had seen only inconvenience and expense. Now that the difficult work was complete, he suddenly appreciated the results. That's why I want to buy it back, he said, interrupting my thoughts. I've already reached out to the new owners through their agent. I'm prepared to offer substantially more than they paid. I set down my coffee, the pieces falling into place. This meeting wasn't about reconciliation or even closure. It was a negotiation strategy. Tyler believed I might still have influence over the sale, that I could perhaps convince Elizabeth and Catherine to accept his offer. The property has been sold, Tyler. The transaction is complete. The new owners are excited about making Sandpiper Cove their home. Everyone has a price, he insisted. It's just a matter of finding it. I'm prepared to go 30% above market value. This isn't about money. I felt a familiar frustration rising. Tyler's persistent belief that everything could be quantified, monetized, reduced to a transaction. Elizabeth and Catherine bought Sandpiper Cove because they fell in love with it, because they appreciate its character and history, the same reasons I was drawn to it initially. And they could find another historical property to renovate with. The premium I'm offering, he argued, it's a win-win situation. I studied him across the table, recognizing the tactics he employed so effectively in his professional negotiations, framing his desired outcome as mutually beneficial, creating a sense of urgency, appealing to rational self-interest. They had worked on me in the past. These strategies, they would not work today. I won't interfere with the sale, Tyler. Sandpiper Cove belongs to Elizabeth and Catherine now. What they choose to do with it is entirely their decision, but I strongly suspect they won't be interested in selling. His expression hardened, the brief vulnerability of moments ago replaced by cold calculation. Is this punishment, Olivia? For Vanessa? Because if you're trying to hurt me— Not everything is about you, I interrupted, my patience finally exhausted. This isn't revenge or punishment. It's me making a decision about my own property based on what I want for my future. The fact that it inconveniences you is incidental, not intentional. Incidental? His voice rose slightly, drawing glances from nearby patrons. You sold our weekend home without a word of warning. How is that not intentional? It was my home, Tyler. My project. My creation. You showed no interest in it until you decided to use it as a backdrop for your new relationship. I gathered my purse, preparing to leave. Our 30 minutes are up. If you have further legal concerns, please direct them to my attorney. He reached across the table, not quite touching my arm. Wait. Please. Something in his tone made me pause. There's something else you should know. About Vanessa. I settled, back in my chair, wary. What about her? Tyler glanced around the coffee shop, then leaned closer. She's left. Packed her things and moved out of my downtown condo this morning. This was unexpected news. I'm sorry to hear that, I said, and was surprised to find I meant it. Despite everything, I took no pleasure in Tyler's pain. Are you? His smile was brittle. She said the beach house situation made her rethink our relationship. Said if I could lose track of who legally owned a multi-million-dollar property, what other surprises might be waiting down the road? The irony was almost too perfect. Vanessa, who had been so quick to claim Sandpiper Cove as her forever home, had fled at the first sign of complications. Her commitment to Tyler had been as superficial as Tyler's appreciation for the historical elements I'd so painstakingly preserved in the house. "That's unfortunate," I said carefully, "but perhaps understandable from her perspective." "Is it?" Tyler ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration I'd seen countless times during our marriage. "We're talking about a misunderstanding about property ownership, not some fundamental character flaw." I chose my next words with precision. "It's not about the property itself, Tyler. It's about what the situation revealed, that you claimed ownership of something that wasn't yours, that you made assumptions without verifying facts, that you built plans on a foundation that didn't exist." He flinched visibly at this assessment. "You make it sound so calculating. I genuinely thought we had joint ownership of Sandpiper Cove. It was an honest mistake." "Was it?" "The purchase documents clearly stated it was my separate property. The LLC operating agreement spelled out sole ownership. The prenup differentiated between marital and separate assets. Did you read any of those documents before signing them?" His silence was answer enough. "That's the issue, Tyler. Not that you made a mistake, but that you consistently devalued the details I considered important. You dismissed my thoroughness as excessive, my caution as unnecessary. You called my documentation paperwork obsession. And now those very details have become consequential." He sat back, defensive again. "So this is a lesson? You're teaching me the importance of reading the fine print?" "No, Tyler. I'm not teaching you anything. I'm simply living my life according to my own values, making choices based on what matters to me." I stood, gathering my belongings. "What you learn from that is entirely up to you." As I walked away, I heard him call after me. "The house isn't worth it, Olivia. No property is worth destroying what we had." I paused, turning back to face him one last time. "That's where you're wrong, Tyler. It was never about the house. It was about respect. For my choices, my values, my separate identity within our marriage. Sandpiper Cove was just the most visible manifestation of that disconnect." Outside, the evening air had turned chilly, a reminder that autumn was progressing toward winter. I walked several blocks before realizing I had no particular destination in mind, my thoughts too turbulent for the confined space of my apartment. Almost without conscious decision, I found myself heading toward the waterfront, drawn to the familiar comfort of being near water, even if it was the harbor rather than the open ocean of Sandpiper Cove. I found a bench overlooking the bay and sat, watching the last ferry of the evening making its way toward the terminal, lights reflecting on the dark water. My conversation with Tyler had disturbed me more than I wanted to admit, not because I regretted selling Sandpiper Cove. That decision still felt right, necessary even. What unsettled me was the clarity with which I now saw the patterns of our marriage, the small compromises that had accumulated over years, until they formed a chasm between who I was and who I'd allowed myself to become in relation to Tyler. Chibain. Discovery of Sandpiper Cove had marked a turning point, though I hadn't recognized it at the time. The dilapidated beach house had awakened something dormant within me, a capacity for vision, for transformation, for passionate engagement with creation. The renovation had become more than a project. It had been a reclamation of self. I remembered the first weekend I'd spent at the property after closing, when it was still just a neglected structure with potential rather than the showcase home it would eventually become. I'd arrived with sleeping bags, basic tools, and a cooler of food, planning to camp out while assessing the work ahead. That night, I'd sat on the deteriorating deck overlooking the ocean, wrapped in a blanket against the coastal chill, a bottle of wine and a notebook, my only companions. As darkness fell and the lighthouse beam began its rhythmic sweep across the water, I'd written not construction plans or renovation budgets, but something more personal, a vision for the house that was inseparable from my vision for myself. Want to create spaces that feel both timeless and alive, I'd written. Rooms that honor history without being bound by it. A home that responds to its natural setting rather than imposing upon it. Balance between preservation and innovation, between respect for the past and openness to the future. Looking back, I recognized those aspirations had been as much about my own evolution as about the house. Sandpiper Cove had become the canvas, on which I'd worked out my own transformation. From the cautious, accommodating woman who had gradually subordinated her preferences to her husband's, to someone more confident, more authentic, more willing to stand firmly in her own truth. Tyler had never understood this deeper meaning of the renovation. To him, it had been a puzzling hobby that took me away from our shared life, a financial investment with questionable returns, an indulgence he tolerated rather than supported. His sudden appreciation for the completed project was aesthetic, not existential. He valued the result without comprehending the process or its significance. My phone vibrated with an incoming text from Jackson. Just passed by Sandpiper Cove again. Moving truck gone. Lights off. Looks like they've cleared out. Relief washed over me. At least this part would be clean, without the messiness of forced eviction or legal intervention. Thanks for checking. Did it look like they took anything they shouldn't have? Hard to tell from outside, but nothing obvious missing. No damage visible from the windows. Perfect. The new owners are doing the final walkthrough tomorrow morning. I slipped the phone back into my pocket, my gaze returning to the water. The ferry had docked, passengers disembarking, moving toward waiting cars or walking into the city, each carrying their own stories, their own transitions. My own transition was still unfolding, the shape of my post-Tyler, post-Sandpiper Cove life not yet fully formed. For 12 years, my identity had been partially defined by my marriage, my role as Tyler's wife, my participation in the life we'd constructed together. Then, for 5 years, Sandpiper Cove had provided an alternative focus, a project that was wholly mine, an expression of values Tyler didn't share. Now both were gone. The marriage ending, the house sold. What remained was simply me. Not Tyler's wife, not the creator of Sandpiper Cove. Just Olivia Lawrence, standing at the intersection of past and future, holding the compass of her own values, ready to chart a new course. The realization was both terrifying and exhilarating. Without the frameworks that had defined my life for so long, I faced unprecedented freedom to choose locations, relationships, projects, and purposes, aligned with my authentic self rather than compromised by accommodation. A memory surfaced, unexpectedly sharp and vivid. During the renovation of Sandpiper Cove's kitchen, I'd uncovered a hidden structural beam that the original architect had incorporated into the design. It wasn't strictly necessary for support, more decorative than functional, but it had been crafted with such care, such attention to detail, that removing it felt wrong. Instead, I'd adjusted my renovation plans, redesigning the space to showcase this architectural element rather than conceal it. The project manager had questioned the decision, pointing out the additional costs and complications it would create. No one would know if we just removed it, he'd argued. It would make the renovation simpler, cleaner. I would know, I'd responded. And that matters. That moment, that insistence on honoring quality even when it remained unseen, that prioritization of integrity over convenience, had been a declaration of values. Every decision at Sandpiper Cove had been similarly principled. Choosing sustainable materials despite their higher cost, researching historical accuracy even when modern alternatives were available, preserving original features that others might have discarded as outdated. These weren't just renovation choices, they were expressions of character. And they had gradually revealed to me what I truly valued: authenticity over appearance, substance over status, Creation over consumption. Integrity over expediency. Tyler's values had always been different. Not wrong, necessarily, but fundamentally incompatible with mine in ways that had become increasingly apparent during the Sandpiper Cove project. He prioritized efficiency over craftsmanship, impression over substance, acquisition over creation. Our marriage had functioned as long as I adapted to his value system, subordinating my preferences to his, accepting his definition of success. The beach house had changed that equilibrium, giving me a separate sphere where my values could guide decisions without compromise or justification. Perhaps the marriage had been doomed from that moment, not because of Vanessa or any specific betrayal, but because I had discovered what it felt like to live in alignment with my own truth, making it impossible to return to the comfortable compromises of before. My phone buzzed again, this time with a message from Angela Reeves. Elizabeth and Catherine just confirmed they're bringing their architect tomorrow. They're thinking about some sensitive upgrades to the property while maintaining its historical integrity. Thought you'd like to know the house will be in good hands. The news brought unexpected tears to my eyes, not of sorrow, but of completion, of rightness. Sandpiper Cove would continue to evolve, but with owners who understood its value, who would build upon the foundation I'd established rather than erasing it. I typed back, "That's wonderful news. Please let them know they're welcome to contact me if they have any questions about the original structure or the renovation choices." I kept detailed documentation they might find useful. As darkness settled fully over the waterfront, I finally rose from the bench, ready to return to my apartment. Tomorrow would bring the official transition of Sandpiper Cove to its new owners, another step in the unfolding process of change that had begun with a text message at 2:36 a.m., 3 months earlier. I felt a sudden, powerful gratitude, not just for the legal protections that had secured my ownership of the property, but for the deeper awakening the house had facilitated. Without Sandpiper Cove, I might never have recognized the dissonance between my values and the life I'd been living. I might have continued accommodating, compromising, adjusting to Tyler's vision rather than honoring my own. The beach house had been worth every hour of labor, every dollar invested, every difficult decision navigated. Not because of its monetary value or the satisfaction of its completion, but because of what it had revealed to me about myself, my capacity for vision, for transformation, for standing firmly in my own truth when necessary. As I walked back toward my apartment, I realized that selling Sandpiper Cove hadn't been a surrender of that hard-won ground, but rather its ultimate expression, the recognition that I no longer needed a physical structure to embody my values or validate my vision. I could carry those forward into whatever came next. The house had served its purpose in my life. Now it would serve a new purpose for Elizabeth and Catherine, becoming part of their story as it had been part of mine. There was a rightness to this progression, a sense of continuity rather than ending. Tomorrow, the keys will officially change hands. But the more valuable inheritance, the confidence to trust my own judgment, the courage to stand by my principles, the clarity to recognize what truly mattered, would remain with me, guiding whatever I chose to build next. I arrived at Sandpiper Cove the next morning just before 10 a.m., having decided to be present for the final walkthrough with Elizabeth and Catherine. Though my presence wasn't technically necessary, Angela Reeves could handle the transition without me. I felt a need for this last connection, this formal handover of the property I'd poured so much of myself into. The coastal morning was quintessentially Pacific Northwest, misty rain softening the landscape, low clouds obscuring the horizon where the ocean met sky, the air heavy with the scent of salt and pine. As I pulled into the driveway, memories flooded back, of weekends spent stripping paint and refinishing floors, of evenings watching sunset from the deck, of mornings waking to the rhythmic sound of waves against the shore. Angela's car was already there, as was another vehicle I didn't recognize, presumably belonging to Elizabeth and Catherine. Taking a deep breath, I gathered the folder containing documents I thought might be useful to the new owners. Architectural drawings of the original structure, notes on materials used in the renovation, contact information for craftspeople who had worked on various aspects of the project. Inside, voices drifted from the main living area, animated conversation punctuated by occasional laughter. I paused in the entryway, taking a final inventory of the space. Tyler and Vanessa had indeed cleared out, leaving behind only what had been specified in our agreement. The furniture I'd carefully selected remained in place, each piece chosen to complement the home's architectural character while providing modern comfort. "Olivia!" Angela called, spotting me from the living room. "Perfect timing. We were just discussing the history of the property." 3 people turned toward me, Angela, and 2 women I assumed were Elizabeth and Catherine. The taller of the 2 stepped forward immediately, hand extended in greeting. "You must be Olivia. I'm Elizabeth Parker." Her handshake was firm. Her smile genuine. "This is my wife, Catherine. We can't thank you enough for entrusting us with this incredible home." Catherine moved to join her, shorter but with the same air of quiet confidence. "The photos didn't do it justice," she said warmly. "What you've accomplished here is remarkable." There was sincerity in their appreciation that eased something tight within my chest. These weren't people who saw Sandpiper Cove as a status symbol or an investment opportunity. They understood what I'd tried to create, spaces that honored the past while embracing the present. A home that existed in conversation with its natural setting rather than imposing upon it. "I brought some documentation that might be helpful," I said, offering the folder to them. Original blueprints, material specifications, contact information for artisans who worked on the renovation. Catherine accepted it with evident delight. "This is incredibly thoughtful. We were just saying how much we'd like to understand the choices you made during the restoration." "Speaking of which," Elizabeth added, "we were hoping you might be willing to give us a tour. Angela has shown us the property, of course, but hearing about the renovation from the person who envisioned it would be invaluable." The request surprised me. I'd anticipated a quick exchange of pleasantries, perhaps some practical questions about the property's systems or maintenance requirements, followed by a clean break. The idea of walking through Sandpiper Cove one last time, explaining the thought process behind each decision, felt both appealing and potentially painful. Angela sensed my hesitation. "Only if you're comfortable, of course. I'm happy to continue the walkthrough if you'd prefer." "No, I'd be glad to," I decided, recognizing that this might actually provide a sense of closure that a hasty departure would not. "Where would you like to start?" For the next hour, I guided Elizabeth and Catherine through the house, room by room, explaining the challenges and discoveries that had shaped the renovation. I showed them where I'd uncovered the original fir flooring beneath layers of linoleum. In the kitchen, pointed out the hand-carved newel post on the staircase that I'd painstakingly restored. Explained how I'd reconfigured the primary bathroom to capitalize on ocean views while preserving its vintage character. Throughout the tour, their questions revealed a depth of knowledge about historical architecture that I found reassuring. Elizabeth, it turned out, had taught American architectural history before retiring to focus on writing. Catherine, a marine biologist, shared my concern for environmental sustainability and appreciated the eco-friendly systems I'd incorporated. "What made you decide to sell?" Catherine asked as we stood on the deck overlooking the ocean, the question gentle but direct. I considered how to answer, wary of bringing the complications of my divorce into this positive interaction. "Life circumstances changed," I said finally, "and it felt like the right time for Sandpiper Cove to begin its next chapter." Elizabeth nodded, seeming to understand the boundaries of my response. "Well, we're grateful that the next chapter includes us. This place is special, not just because of the location or the architecture, but because of the intention behind its restoration. You can feel it in every room." Her words touched me deeply, acknowledging exactly what I'd hoped to achieve with the renovation. Not just a physically beautiful space, but one with emotional resonance, with integrity, with soul. I'm grateful too, I admitted. Knowing the property will be appreciated for the right reasons makes letting go much easier. As we completed the tour and returned to the living room, Angela pulled out her clipboard with its final checklist of transition items: keys, garage door openers, security codes, utility information. The practical details of property transfer seemed oddly mundane compared to the emotional significance of the moment. "We'd love to stay in touch," Catherine said as I prepared to leave. "If you're ever in the area and want to see how the house is evolving, you'd be more than welcome." The invitation was clearly sincere, not merely a polite gesture. I found myself unexpectedly moved by it, by the generosity of including me in the property's future, rather than expecting a clean break. "I'd like that," I said, and was surprised to realize I meant it. The thought of visiting Sandpiper Cove as a guest rather than an owner wasn't as painful as I might have imagined. There was a rightness to the progression, a sense that the house was continuing its journey just as I was continuing mine. Outside, the misty rain had cleared, sunlight breaking through clouds to sparkle on wet foliage and dapple the driveway with patterns of light and shadow. Angela walked me to my car, her professional demeanor softening into friendly concern. "How are you feeling about all this?" she asked. I glanced back at the house, at its weathered cedar siding and gleaming windows, at the distinctive roofline that had first caught my attention 5 years earlier. "Good," I said, slightly surprised by my own equanimity. "Better than I expected. Elizabeth and Catherine will be excellent stewards." "They're certainly enthusiastic about the property," Angela agreed. "Already talking about subtle enhancements that honor your vision. It's the ideal outcome, really." As I drove away, watching Sandpiper Cove recede in my rearview mirror, I felt an unexpected lightness. The property had served its purpose in my life, not just as a creative outlet or a financial investment, but as a catalyst for self-discovery, for the clarification of values, for the courage to stand firmly in my own truth. Now it would serve a new purpose for Elizabeth and Catherine, becoming part of their story as it had been part of mine. There was comfort in that continuity, in knowing that what I'd created would be appreciated, maintained, evolved with care rather than carelessly discarded. My phone rang as I reached the coastal highway, Jackson checking in. "How did it go?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. "Surprisingly well," I told him. "The new owners are lovely. They understand what makes the house special." "And you're okay? Really okay?" I smiled at his protective instinct. Jackson had been my steadfast ally throughout the divorce process, ready to take Tyler's side in theory as his longtime friend, but firmly in my corner in practice once he understood the situation. "I'm really okay," I assured him. "Better than okay, actually. It feels like the right decision, the right ending to that chapter." "Speaking of endings," Jackson said, his tone shifting, "have you heard the latest about Tyler?" A familiar wariness crept in. "No. What now?" "The Westbrook account is being pulled from his team. Rumor has it that Michelle Sullivan at Westbrook Trust got wind of how Tyler handled the beach house situation and wasn't impressed. Apparently, she and her husband own several historical properties and take their stewardship very seriously. The news didn't bring the satisfaction it might have even a week earlier. Tyler's professional repercussions seemed disconnected from me now, relevant to a life I was rapidly leaving behind. "That's unfortunate for him," I said neutrally. "That's it? Unfortunate? The guy tried to claim your property as his own, moved his girlfriend in without your knowledge, and threatened legal action when you sold what was rightfully yours. A little schadenfreude would be justified." I laughed. Jackson's indignation, oddly endearing. I'm saving my energy for moving forward, not looking back. The rest of the drive passed in comfortable conversation. Jackson updating me on his latest art installation, me sharing impressions of Elizabeth and Catherine, both of us carefully avoiding further discussion of Tyler. By the time I reached the city, the emotional weight of the morning had largely dissipated, replaced by a growing excitement about what might come next. Back in my apartment, I opened my laptop to find an email from Meredith Woodson, the real estate attorney who had guided me. Through the Sandpiper Cove sale, Olivia, just heard from Diana Ellis. Tyler is dropping all challenges to the property sale and has agreed to a cooperative approach to the divorce proceedings. Apparently, his attempt to buy the property back from the new owners was firmly rebuffed, and he's finally accepting reality. On a personal note, I rarely see property disputes resolve this cleanly. Your documentation was impeccable, your strategy sound, and your timing perfect. If you ever decide to return to legal practice, my firm would be interested in discussing possibilities. Best regards, Meredith. The email brought a smile of satisfaction, not because Tyler had been defeated, but because the system had worked as it should. Clear documentation, careful planning, and respect for legal processes had prevailed over assumptions and entitlement. There was justice in that outcome, a reaffirmation of principles I valued. The mention of returning to legal practice was unexpected, though not unwelcome. I'd left family law 8 years earlier, finding the emotional toll of divorces and custody battles increasingly difficult to bear. My current role in corporate counsel offered stability and intellectual challenge, but lacked the sense of purpose, of direct positive impact that had initially drawn me to the legal profession. I saved Meredith's email to a folder labeled Future Possibilities, a small action that felt symbolically significant. For years, I'd adapted my career aspirations to complement Tyler's ambitions, choosing corporate law partly because its predictable hours and downtown location integrated smoothly with his networking events and client dinners. Now, with those constraints lifted, every aspect of my professional life was open to reconsideration. The thought was both exhilarating and daunting. Without the frameworks that had defined my life for so long, my marriage to Tyler, my commitment to Sandpiper Cove, I faced unprecedented freedom to chart a new course. But that freedom came with responsibility, with the necessity of making deliberate choices rather than following established patterns. My phone buzzed with a text from Catherine Parker. "Thank you again for the tour this morning. The documentation you provided is incredibly helpful, especially the contact information for the stonemason who restored the fireplace. We're hoping to have him look at the original garden wall as well." Attached was a photo of the living room. At Sandpiper Cove, sunlight now streaming through the west-facing windows, illuminating the space exactly as I'd envisioned when selecting the wall color, a warm ivory that glowed golden in afternoon light, complementing the rich tones of the restored woodwork. "The house looks beautiful in this light," I texted back. "The mason, David Morales, is a true craftsman. He'll do wonderful work on the garden wall. We can already tell. His passion for historical accuracy matches Elizabeth's perfectly. By the way, we found something interesting behind the bookcase in the study when we were measuring for new shelving. Looks like an old letter tucked into the wall. Postmarked 1937. The revelation sent a shiver of delight through me. Despite my thorough renovation, Sandpiper Cove still held secrets, still had stories to tell beyond what I had discovered. There was something perfect about this continuation, this sense that the house's history was still unfolding, still revealing itself. To those who paid attention, "I'd love to know what it says," I responded. The house was built for shipping magnate William Hardwick in 1922. By 1937, it would have belonged to his daughter Eleanor and her husband Thomas Reed. Elizabeth is beside herself with excitement. She's been researching the Hardwick family since we first saw the property listing. "Would it be okay if we shared what we found?" "I'd be honored," I replied, meaning it sincerely. Setting down my phone, I moved to the small balcony of my apartment, looking out at the cityscape that had once felt like a poor substitute for ocean. Views but now represented possibility, connection, new beginnings. The divorce would be finalized soon, Sandpiper Cove had found worthy stewards, and the path ahead, while not yet clearly defined, held promise rather than uncertainty. My phone rang again, this time a number I didn't recognize. Hesitantly, I answered. Olivia Lawrence speaking. Ms. Lawrence, this is Margaret Winters from Coastal Heritage Foundation. Your name was given to me by Elizabeth Parker, who mentioned your remarkable work restoring the historical property at Sandpiper Cove. I recalled mentioning the foundation during this morning's tour, a local nonprofit dedicated to preserving architectural landmarks along the Oregon coast. Yes, I'm familiar with your organization. I referenced your historical archives during my renovation. That's partly why I'm calling, Margaret continued. We're launching a new initiative focused on documenting restoration best practices for historical coastal properties. Elizabeth suggested you might be interested in contributing, perhaps sharing your experience with Sandpiper Cove as a case study. The proposal caught me by surprise. That's an interesting possibility. What exactly would it involve? Initially, we're looking for advisors to help shape the program, defining standards, identifying common challenges, creating resources for property owners. Eventually, we hope to offer workshops and consultation services for people undertaking historically sensitive renovations. The concept resonated deeply with the values that had guided my work at Sandpiper Cove: respect for craftsmanship, commitment to historical accuracy, balance between preservation and sustainability. It also offered a way to channel the knowledge and skills I'd developed during the renovation into something beneficial for others, something extending beyond my personal experience. I'd be very interested in learning more, I told her. Could we schedule a meeting to discuss details? Absolutely. I'll be in the city next Wednesday, perhaps lunch. We arranged to meet at a restaurant near my office, and as I ended the call, I felt a flutter of excitement that had nothing to do with Tyler or the divorce or even Sandpiper Cove itself. This was something new, something aligned with my authentic interests rather than shaped by accommodation or compromise. My doorbell. Ring. Jackson arrived for our planned dinner, carrying takeout from our favorite Thai restaurant. One look at my expression told him something had changed since our phone conversation. What happened? He asked, setting down the food containers. You look different. Energized. I recounted the call from Margaret Winters, the potential involvement with Coastal Heritage Foundation, the way it had sparked a sense of possibility I hadn't experienced in months. That's perfect for you, Jackson said, unpacking spring rolls and pad thai. Combining your legal background with your renovation experience, focusing on preservation, it's like it was designed for your specific skill set. It might be nothing, I cautioned, not wanting to invest too much hope too quickly. Just an exploratory conversation at this point. But it's something you're genuinely excited about, he pointed out. When was the last time you felt that way about a professional opportunity? The question gave me pause. In recent years, my career had become increasingly compartmentalized, a source of financial stability and intellectual engagement, but disconnected from passion or purpose. I'd found those elements in the Sandpiper Cove renovation instead, treating it as a separate sphere where my deeper values could find expression. The possibility of integrating those aspects, of finding professional opportunities that engaged my full self, not just my analytical capabilities, was tantalizing. It suggested a life less fragmented, more coherent, more aligned with my authentic values and interests. I can't remember, I admitted, but I'd like to find out if this could be that kind of opportunity. Jackson raised his water glass in an impromptu toast. To new beginnings, he said. And to my sister, who's finally putting herself first. We spent the evening discussing possibilities, not just the Coastal Heritage Foundation opportunity, but other potential directions, other ways I might reshape my life now that the constraints of my marriage to Tyler had been removed. The conversation flowed easily, punctuated by laughter and occasional moments of surprising vulnerability as I acknowledged hopes and interests I'd set aside during my years with Tyler. After Jackson left, I found myself too energized for sleep despite the emotionally demanding day. Instead, I pulled out my laptop and began researching the Coastal Heritage Foundation, familiarizing myself with their current projects and organizational structure. As midnight approached, I opened a new document and began typing notes, not a formal proposal yet, but a collection of ideas for the restoration documentation initiative Margaret had described. Drawing on my experience at Sandpiper Cove, I outlined common challenges in historical coastal renovations, potential resources for addressing them, frameworks for balancing preservation with modern functionality. The process felt natural, engaging, almost effortless, the flow state I'd experienced during the most absorbing phases of the Sandpiper Cove renovation, but applied now to a broader purpose, a more expansive vision. By the time I finally closed my laptop at nearly 2 a.m., I had created not just a rough outline, but the beginnings of something that could actually make a difference for other historical properties, other renovation projects, other people drawn to the same challenges and rewards that had captivated me. As I prepared for bed, my phone buzzed with a final text message for the day, from Elizabeth Parker. We deciphered the letter. It was from Eleanor Hardwick Reed to her daughter, explaining why she was leaving Sandpiper Cove to her instead of selling after Thomas died. "Some places deserve stewards, not merely owners," she wrote. "This house has a spirit that responds to those who listen to it, who honor its character while allowing it to grow and change as all living things must. I entrust it to you because you understand this truth. Thought you'd appreciate knowing you're part of a tradition of thoughtful caretakers." The message brought unexpected tears to my eyes, not of sorrow, but of connection, of continuity across time. Eleanor Hardwick Reed, writing in 1937, had articulated exactly what I'd felt about Sandpiper Cove, exactly what had drawn me to its restoration, despite Tyler's skepticism and the enormous challenges involved. Some places deserve stewards, not merely owners. The distinction felt profound, applicable not just to historical properties, but to relationships, to communities, to the natural world, to all the things worth preserving not through rigid protection, but through thoughtful evolution, through care that balanced respect for inherent character with openness to growth and change. In selling Sandpiper Cove to Elizabeth and Catherine, I hadn't abandoned my stewardship. I'd passed it to worthy successors, ensuring the continuation of a tradition that predated me and would extend beyond me. There was deep satisfaction in that knowledge, a sense of having honored something larger than my individual connection to the property. And perhaps that was the most valuable lesson of the entire Sandpiper Cove chapter, that true stewardship wasn't about possession or control, but about care and contribution, about leaving things better than we found them before passing them on to those who would continue the work. As I drifted toward sleep, Eleanor's words echoed in my mind. This house has a spirit that responds to those who listen to it. In listening to Sandpiper Cove, in responding to its needs and possibilities, I had also learned to listen more carefully to myself, to discern my authentic values, to recognize what truly mattered to me, to envision a life aligned with those discoveries. That awakening would remain with me long after the property itself had passed to new stewards. It was, in the end, the most precious outcome of the entire journey. Not the transformed house, but the transformed self, not the external renovation, but the internal one. And unlike Sandpiper Cove, that transformation couldn't be sold or transferred or taken away. It was mine to carry forward into whatever I chose to build next. A week after the Sandpiper Cove handover, I sat across from Margaret Winters in a sunlit corner of Laurel Bistro, discussing the Coastal Heritage Foundation's restoration documentation initiative. Margaret was in her 60s, with silver hair cut in a practical bob and the weathered complexion of someone who spent significant time outdoors. Her enthusiasm for historical preservation was infectious, her knowledge impressive. "What I find most encouraging about your approach," she said, reviewing the notes I'd prepared, "is the balance between preservation and practicality. Too often, people fall into extremes, either gutting historical properties without regard for their character or insisting on such strict adherence to original details that the spaces become museums rather than homes." I nodded, recognizing the tension she described. That was my greatest challenge at Sandpiper Cove, honoring the home's historical elements while creating spaces that functioned for contemporary living. Finding that middle ground required constant negotiation between competing values. "Exactly the perspective we need for this initiative," Margaret affirmed. "We want to help people see preservation not as a burden or limitation, but as an opportunity to participate in something meaningful, something that extends beyond individual ownership." Her words echoed Eleanor Hardwick Reed's letter, the distinction between stewardship and mere ownership, the recognition that some places deserved caretakers who understood their deeper value. The synchronicity reinforced my sense that this opportunity had arrived at precisely the right moment in my life. "I'd like to offer you a formal role with the Foundation," Margaret continued. "Initially as an advisor to help shape the program, but potentially developing into something more substantial as the initiative grows. We have funding secured for the first 2 years, with strong prospects for renewal." The proposal was both flattering and intriguing. "What time commitment would you anticipate?" "To start, perhaps 10 hours weekly, predominantly remote work with monthly in-person meetings. We could structure it to accommodate your current position while we determine if there's potential for a longer-term arrangement." It was a generous offer, one that would allow me to explore this new direction without immediately abandoning the security of my corporate counsel role. I found myself unexpectedly excited by the possibility of work that integrated my legal background with my passion for historical preservation, that connected to values I'd expressed through the Sandpiper Cove renovation. "I'd be honored to participate," I told her. "The initiative aligns perfectly with lessons I learned during my own restoration project." As we discussed next steps, my phone buzzed with an incoming call. Diana Ellis, Tyler's attorney. I silenced it, not wanting to interrupt the productive conversation with Margaret. Whatever Diana needed could wait. By the time we finished lunch, I had a clear understanding of my role with the Foundation and a calendar of upcoming meetings. The opportunity felt like a bridge to whatever might come next. Not a complete reinvention, but a thoughtful evolution that built upon my existing skills while allowing new interests to flourish. Outside the restaurant, I checked my voicemail. Diana's message was brief and professional. "Ms. Lawrence, we've received a settlement proposal from your attorney that requires discussion. Please call my office at your earliest convenience." I frowned, uncertain what this referred to. Meredith, and I had submitted a standard division of assets proposal weeks earlier, based on the parameters established in our prenuptial agreement. Nothing in that document should have required urgent discussion. Rather than returning Diana's call immediately, I phoned Meredith, wanting to understand the situation before engaging with Tyler's representative. "I was just about to call you," Meredith said when she answered. "I received a counterproposal from Tyler this morning that's unconventional, to say the least." "What does that mean?" "It seems he's had a change of heart about several aspects of the divorce. He's offering you a significantly larger percentage of the investment portfolio than required by the prenup, plus full ownership of the downtown condo, which legally qualifies as marital property." This was unexpected. Our prenuptial agreement had clearly outlined how assets would be divided in case of divorce, with provisions generally favorable to Tyler given his family wealth and higher earning potential. For him to voluntarily offer more than required suggested ulterior motives. "What's the catch?" I asked, inherently suspicious of uncharacteristic generosity from someone who had recently threatened legal action over property he had no right to claim. That's where it gets interesting, Meredith replied. He wants to include a confidentiality clause regarding the circumstances of your separation and the Sandpiper Cove situation. Specifically, he wants to prohibit either party from discussing those matters with clients, colleagues, or within your professional circles. The motivation became immediately clear. Tyler's attempt to claim Sandpiper Cove had already cost him the Westbrook account. He was concerned about further professional repercussions if details of the situation became widely known. Essentially, he's trying to buy my silence, I summarized. That's my reading, Meredith confirmed. Though from a strictly financial perspective, it's a favorable offer. The additional portfolio percentage alone represents a significant sum. I considered the proposal, weighing financial benefit against principle. Tyler's behavior, moving Vanessa into Sandpiper Cove without my knowledge, claiming ownership of property that wasn't his, threatening legal action when confronted with reality, had been fundamentally dishonest. Now he wanted to ensure that dishonesty remained private, protected from professional consequences. I need to think about this, I told Meredith. Can you send me the full proposal? Already in your inbox. No rush on a response, but Diana is clearly eager to resolve this quickly. After ending the call, I walked toward my office building, mind churning with conflicting considerations. Tyler's offer was financially advantageous. The additional portfolio percentage alone would provide substantial security as I considered potential career transitions. The downtown condo, while never my preferred living space, represented significant value in the current real estate market. But accepting the confidentiality clause felt uncomfortably like complicity in Tyler's attempt to avoid accountability for his actions. It wasn't about revenge or punishment. It was about integrity, about living according to the values I'd rediscovered through the Sandpiper Cove journey. Back at my desk, I opened Tyler's proposal, reading it carefully. The language was precise, clearly drafted by Diana Ellis with her characteristic attention to detail. The confidentiality provision was broad, but not unlimited. It prevented discussion of the marriage's dissolution and the property dispute in professional contexts, but didn't prohibit private conversations with friends or family members. Most interesting was a section toward the end, easily overlooked amidst legal terminology, that included a formal acknowledgement from Tyler that Sandpiper Cove had been my separate property, that he had no legitimate claim to it, and that my sale of the property had been entirely legal and appropriate. It was, in essence, a formal admission that his previous position had been baseless. This acknowledgement suggested more than mere financial calculation on Tyler's part. It indicated a level of personal reckoning, a willingness to formally concede what he had previously contested so vehemently. Whether motivated by legal advice or genuine reflection, it represented a shift I hadn't anticipated. As I contemplated the proposal, my office phone rang, my assistant alerting me that James Crawford, the company's general counsel and my direct supervisor, wanted to see me immediately. The request was unusual enough to be concerning. James typically scheduled meetings well in advance, respecting the workflow of his legal team. In his corner office, James greeted me with uncharacteristic formality. "Olivia, thank you for coming so promptly. Please, have a seat." The atmosphere felt tense, the typical casual rapport between us notably absent. "Is something wrong, James?" He sighed, removing his glasses and placing them carefully on his desk. "I've received let's call it concerning communication from Mitchell Capital Partners." My pulse quickened. Mitchell Capital Partners was Tyler's investment firm, or more accurately, the firm founded by Tyler's father that Tyler had joined after business school, eventually becoming a partner. They weren't clients of our company, which made the communication James referenced even more puzzling. "What kind of communication?" James selected his words with evident care. "A letter suggesting that your ongoing divorce proceedings might create a conflict of interest regarding certain investment strategies our company has implemented based on your recommendations. The implication was clear, but absurd. That's completely unfounded, I responded, keeping my voice measured despite rising indignation. My personal situation has no bearing on my professional responsibilities or judgment. I agree entirely, James assured me. Your work has been exemplary, and I've seen no evidence whatsoever of compromised decision-making. However, the mere suggestion creates administrative complications we need to address. The strategic nature of this move became increasingly apparent. Tyler, or someone acting on his behalf, was attempting to create professional pressure that would make his settlement offer more appealing. By raising baseless concerns with my employer, he hoped to increase my motivation to accept the confidentiality agreement, to make the entire situation disappear quietly. May I see the letter? I asked. James hesitated briefly before sliding a document across his desk. The Mitchell Capital Partners letterhead was prominent at the top, but the signature at the bottom belonged not to Tyler, but to Richard Mitchell, his father and the firm's founder. The letter was masterfully crafted, raising vague concerns without making specific allegations, suggesting potential conflicts without explicitly claiming they existed, recommending appropriate oversight without actually demanding any particular action. It was the kind of communication designed to create discomfort without providing grounds for defamation claims, to plant seeds of doubt while maintaining plausible deniability. This is directly related to my settlement negotiations, I told James, deciding transparency was the best approach. Tyler has proposed terms that include a confidentiality agreement regarding our divorce. This letter appears to be an attempt to pressure me into accepting those terms. James's expression shifted from concern to something closer to anger. That's completely inappropriate. Using corporate resources to influence personal legal proceedings crosses several ethical boundaries. I agree, but proving that connection would be difficult. I returned the letter to his desk. The question is how to respond in a way that protects both my professional standing and our company's interests. James considered this, fingers steepled beneath his chin. From the company's perspective, we can issue a formal response indicating that we've reviewed our compliance protocols and found no evidence of conflict or compromise. We can also document that your investment recommendations have consistently outperformed market benchmarks, creating value for the organization. His support was reassuring, but didn't fully address the underlying issue. The Mitchell Capital Partners. Letter hadn't been sent to create actual professional consequences, merely to increase pressure during a critical phase of settlement negotiations. The timing was too perfect to be coincidental. I appreciate that, James. Would it be possible to take a personal day tomorrow? I need to consult with my attorney regarding these developments. Of course, he agreed immediately. Take whatever time you need to resolve this situation. And Olivia? He hesitated, clearly choosing his next words with care. I've known Richard Mitchell for 20 years. This kind of tactic isn't his usual approach. I suspect other influences are at work. The observation aligned with my own assessment. Richard Mitchell had a reputation for ethical business practices and straightforward dealing. The manipulative nature of the letter seemed inconsistent with that history, suggesting Tyler's involvement despite his father's signature. Back in my office, I called Meredith, explaining the new development. Her response was immediate and forceful. This crosses a line, Olivia. Using his father's firm to create professional pressure during settlement negotiations could be considered coercive. We have grounds to formally object and potentially file an ethics complaint with the Bar Association regarding Diana Ellis's involvement, assuming she's aware of this tactic. Let's not escalate unnecessarily, I cautioned, uncertain whether Diana actually knew about the Mitchell Capital Partners letter. What I need is a strategic response that addresses both the settlement offer and this new pressure tactic. Meredith's tone shifted from indignation to calculation. Actually, this gives us significant leverage. The letter to your employer was clumsy. It creates a paper trail suggesting improper influence during settlement negotiations. We can use that to push back on the confidentiality provision while still accepting the favorable financial terms. Her approach made tactical sense, but something about continuing this pattern of maneuver and countermaneuver felt exhausting, misaligned with the person I was becoming. The Sandpiper Cove chapter had taught me the value of directness, of standing firmly in my own truth, rather than engaging in strategic games. What if we took a different approach? I suggested. Rather than countering manipulation with more manipulation, what if we simply named what's happening and proposed a cleaner resolution? What did you have in mind? I outlined a response that acknowledged Tyler's financial offer as generous, accepted those terms without modification, but rejected the confidentiality provision as unnecessary and inappropriate. Instead, I would commit to discretion regarding our personal history as a matter of basic decency, not contractual obligation, while directly addressing the Mitchell Capital Partners letter as an unacceptable tactic that had to be formally withdrawn and acknowledged as baseless. That's unusually straightforward, Meredith observed, surprise evident in her voice. Most divorce negotiations involve more strategic positioning, more give and take. I'm tired of games, I admitted. The past few months have clarified what matters to me: integrity, authenticity, directness. I'd rather stake out a clear position based on those values than engage in tactical maneuvering, even if it might yield marginally better financial terms. There was a brief silence before Meredith responded, her tone softening. You know, in 15 years of family law, I've rarely heard someone express that perspective. Divorce typically brings out tactical thinking rather than value-based decisions. It's refreshing. So you'll draft a response along those lines? Absolutely. And for what it's worth, I think it's the right approach. Not just ethically, but practically. Clarity and principle can be surprisingly effective negotiating positions, especially when the other side expects conventional gamesmanship. After ending the call, I felt a sense of resolve that had been building since the Sandpiper Cove confrontation. A commitment to direct engagement rather than strategic avoidance, to standing in my truth rather than maneuvering around difficult conversations. It was a stance that would have been foreign to me a year earlier, when accommodation and compromise had been my default approach to conflict, especially with Tyler. The transformation wasn't complete or perfect. I still felt the pull of old patterns, the temptation to counter Tyler's manipulation with equally calculating responses. But the Sandpiper Cove journey had revealed an alternative path, one that honored my rediscovered values of authenticity, integrity, and directness, even when those values created short-term discomfort or complexity. That evening, I drafted a personal email to Tyler, not a formal legal communication through attorneys, but a direct message addressing the underlying dynamics of our situation. Tyler, I've reviewed your settlement proposal and discussed it with Meredith. I've also received a copy of the letter Richard Mitchell sent to James Crawford at my company, raising baseless concerns about potential conflicts of interest. Let me be direct. I find the timing of that letter disturbing, its content unfounded, and its apparent purpose, creating professional pressure during settlement negotiations, inappropriate. Whether you were directly involved or not, it represents a breach of basic fairness in our divorce proceedings. Regarding your settlement offer, the financial terms are generous, and I'm prepared to accept them. The confidentiality provision, however, is unnecessary and seems intended primarily to protect you from professional consequences rather than addressing legitimate privacy concerns. I have no interest in damaging your reputation or business relationships, not because of contractual obligation, but because vindictiveness has never been my nature. Whatever happened between us, I still wish you well professionally. That said, I won't accept provisions that prevent me from speaking honestly if directly. asked about our situation. Integrity matters to me, perhaps more than ever since the Sandpiper Cove experience clarified what I truly value. I propose we move forward with the financial terms you've offered, remove the confidentiality clause entirely, and include a mutual commitment to basic respect and discretion without legal enforcement mechanisms. Additionally, I request formal withdrawal of the Mitchell Capital Partners letter and acknowledgement that no actual conflict of interest exists. This approach would allow both of us to conclude our marriage with dignity, fairness, and integrity, values I hope we still share despite our differences. Olivia I hesitated before sending it, uncertain whether direct communication would be productive given our recent history. But the alternative, continuing to interact exclusively through legal representatives, felt increasingly artificial, a perpetuation of distance that served neither of us well in reaching final resolution. Decision made, I pressed send, then closed my laptop and prepared for bed. Whatever Tyler's response, I'd made a choice aligned with my evolving sense of self, choosing directness over strategy, clarity over positioning, integrity over advantage. The outcome mattered less than the alignment between my actions and my values, a lesson Sandpiper Cove had taught me through every challenging renovation decision. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. For a moment, I thought it might be Tyler responding to my email, but the message proved to be from Catherine Parker instead. Hope you don't mind. Got your number from Angela Reeves. Thought you'd want to see this. Elizabeth researched Eleanor Hardwick Reed and found this photo from 1936. The living room looks exactly as you restored it. Your instincts about the original design were spot on. Attached was a black and white photograph showing Sandpiper Cove's living room as it had been, nearly 90 years earlier. The architectural elements I'd worked so hard to restore, the coffered ceiling, the wood paneling, the distinctive window casings, were clearly visible, confirming that my design choices had indeed recaptured the home's original character. The validation brought unexpected joy, not because it confirmed my renovation decisions, but because it connected me to the property's lineage, to a tradition of stewardship that extended across generations. Eleanor Hardwick Reed had preserved what her father created. I had restored what subsequent owners had altered or neglected. Elizabeth and Catherine would continue that trajectory of thoughtful evolution. In that continuity, I found comfort that transcended the immediate complexities of divorce proceedings and settlement negotiations. Whatever happened with Tyler, whatever professional path I ultimately chose, the work I'd done at Sandpiper Cove would endure, not as a monument to my personal vision, but as part of an ongoing conversation between past, present, and future, between human creativity and architectural heritage, between individual expression and cultural preservation. I texted back, "This is remarkable. Thank you for sharing." It's deeply satisfying to see that the restoration aligned so closely with the original design. Please keep me updated on any other historical discoveries. Setting my phone aside, I drifted toward sleep with a sense of peace that had been elusive during the turbulent months of separation and conflict. Tomorrow would bring whatever response. Tyler chose to my direct communication, acceptance, rejection, or something in between. But regardless of his reaction, I had found my footing, my voice, my commitment to values rediscovered through the Sandpiper Cove journey. Some transformations couldn't be undone, even if their catalysts were sold or left behind. The beach house had changed hands, but the clarity it had brought remained with me. A compass for navigating whatever challenges lay ahead, a foundation for building whatever came next. 6 months after selling Sandpiper Cove, I stood on a different stretch of the Oregon coast, clipboard in hand, surveying a neglected craftsman bungalow perched on a bluff overlooking the Pacific. Beside me, Margaret Winters from the Coastal Heritage Foundation made notes on her tablet, occasionally consulting the property's historical documentation. "The structural report is better than expected," she observed, gesturing toward the foundation. Minimal water damage despite nearly a decade of neglect. The bones are good. I smiled at the familiar assessment, the same words I'd used when first discovering Sandpiper Cove 5 years earlier. The craftsmanship in these coastal properties is remarkable. They built to withstand the elements, which makes them perfect candidates for restoration rather than demolition, Margaret agreed. If we can secure this property for the Foundation's demonstration project, it would provide an ideal case study for the documentation initiative you've been developing. In the months since joining the Coastal Heritage Foundation as an advisor, my role had expanded significantly. What began as a 10-hour weekly commitment had evolved into a comprehensive program for documenting historical restoration best practices, with educational workshops and consultation services for property owners undertaking historically sensitive renovations. The personal satisfaction this work provided had surprised me. After years in corporate law, where success was measured in billable hours and favorable contract terms, I found profound fulfillment in work that connected to deeper values: preservation, craftsmanship, environmental sustainability, cultural heritage. If the owner accepts our offer, when would renovations begin? I asked, already mentally cataloging the bungalow's distinctive features: the river rock chimney, the decorative brackets supporting deep eaves, the built-in cabinetry visible through windows. Early spring, ideally. We'd want to document the entire process, creating video tutorials alongside written guidelines. Your expertise would be central to the project. The trust Margaret placed in my judgment still felt somewhat surreal. In the corporate world, I'd been valued for technical knowledge and careful risk management. At the Foundation, people sought my perspective on matters ranging from architectural details to community engagement strategies, from material selection to the philosophical underpinnings of preservation ethics. This appreciation for my full range of capabilities, not just analytical skills but creative vision, not just technical knowledge but aesthetic judgment, represented one of many transformations that had unfolded since the Sandpiper Cove chapter closed. My phone vibrated with an incoming text from Jackson. "Lunch still on for 1 cogs? Have news about the gallery showing," I quickly replied, confirming our plans before returning my attention to the bungalow. The property required extensive work: new roofing, electrical upgrades, window restoration, landscape rehabilitation, but possessed the essential character, the authentic bones that made preservation worthwhile. Like Sandpiper Cove before its renovation, it represented potential rather than perfection, possibility rather than completion. "I think we should pursue this one," I told Margaret. "It has all the elements we've been looking for: historical significance, distinctive architectural features, reasonable structural condition, and strong community connections." She nodded, clearly pleased with my assessment. "I'll draft an offer letter this afternoon. And speaking of legal matters..." Her tone shifted to one of friendly curiosity. "How are things progressing with your firm?" The question referenced another significant evolution in my professional life. 3 months earlier, I'd left my corporate counsel position to join Harrington and Woodson, Meredith's firm, establishing a specialized practice area focused on historical, property transactions, preservation easements, and restoration-related legal issues. The decision hadn't been impulsive. After my direct communication to Tyler about his settlement offer, events had unfolded in ways that clarified my path forward. Tyler's response to my email had come the following morning, not a defensive reaction or counteroffer, but a simple acknowledgement. "You're right about the Mitchell Capital Partners letter. It was inappropriate, and I've already contacted my father to formally withdraw it. The rest of your proposal sounds reasonable. Let's have our attorneys work out the details." It was perhaps the most straightforward communication we'd had in years, free from the strategic positioning that had characterized so much of our interaction during both marriage and separation. Something in my direct approach had seemingly broken through the layers of calculation, creating space for a more authentic exchange. The settlement was finalized 2 weeks later, largely on the terms I'd proposed. Favorable financial provisions without restrictive confidentiality clauses. Just a mutual commitment to basic discretion and respect. True to his word, Tyler had arranged withdrawal of the Mitchell Capital Partners letter, with his father sending a formal apology to both James Crawford and myself for raising unfounded concerns. With the divorce concluded and financial matters settled, I'd found myself at a crossroads professionally. The corporate counsel role that had once seemed perfectly suited to my skills now felt constraining, disconnected from the values and interests I'd rediscovered through the Sandpiper Cove experience. Meredith's casual suggestion over celebratory drinks, "Have you ever considered joining a specialized firm?" had initially seemed impractical, but further conversation revealed genuine opportunity. Harrington and Woodson had been seeking to establish a practice area catering to the growing number of historical property transactions along the Oregon coast, a niche that aligned perfectly with my evolving professional interests and personal connections. "The practice is growing steadily," I told Margaret, returning to her question. "We've added 2 new clients this month alone, a historical hotel rehabilitation project in Astoria, and a lighthouse keeper's residence being converted to an educational center." "Not surprising," she responded. "Your combination of corporate, legal experience and practical restoration knowledge is unique. Plus, you understand the philosophical aspects of preservation, the why behind the how, which matters tremendously to clients in this space." Her assessment touched on something fundamental that had changed for me since selling Sandpiper Cove. I'd moved from a compartmentalized life, corporate job in one box, personal renovation project in another, marriage in a third, to an integrated existence where professional work, personal values, and authentic relationships reinforced rather than competed with each other. After completing our assessment of the Craftsman bungalow, I drove to Shoreline Cafe to meet Jackson for lunch. The restaurant's patio overlooked the harbor, offering views of fishing boats and pleasure craft against a backdrop of forested hills. My brother was already waiting at our usual table, a portfolio case leaning against his chair. "Perfect timing," he said as I joined him. Food just arrived. Jackson looked more relaxed than I'd seen him in years, the benefits of his own recent life changes evident in his easy smile and confident posture. 6 months earlier, he'd left his position at a commercial design firm to focus exclusively on his fine art career, a transition supported in part by my purchase of his former studio space, which I'd converted into my new apartment. "So what's the gallery news?" I asked, helping myself to the seafood platter he'd ordered for us to share. He grinned, opening the portfolio to reveal a promotional postcard. "Solo show, Westbrook Gallery, opening reception 6 weeks from Saturday." "Jackson, that's incredible." Westbrook Gallery was among the most prestigious spaces in the city, known for launching artists into national recognition. "How did this happen?" "Remember Michelle Sullivan from Westbrook Trust? The one who pulled the account from Tyler's firm after hearing about the beach house situation?" I nodded, the connection not immediately clear. "Turns out she's married to David Sullivan, the gallery owner. She saw my installation at the Arts Center last month and mentioned it to him. He visited my studio yesterday and offered the show on the spot." The synchronicity was remarkable. Michelle Sullivan's professional decision regarding Tyler's firm had created an unexpected opportunity for Jackson, a positive outcome emerging from what had initially seemed purely negative circumstances. "That's fantastic," I said sincerely. "Your work deserves this recognition." He studied me for a moment, his expression turning thoughtful. "You know what's strange? If Tyler hadn't moved Vanessa into your beach house, if you hadn't sold the property in response, if the whole situation hadn't affected his professional reputation, this opportunity might never have materialized." "The butterfly effect in action," I agreed. Small decisions creating unpredictable consequences down the line. Not just consequences, transformations. Jackson gestured between us. "Look at us now compared to a year ago. You were in a marriage that had you constantly compromising your values, working a job that utilized only a fraction of your capabilities. I was designing commercial spaces that paid well, but left me creatively unfulfilled. He wasn't wrong. The changes in both our lives over the past year had been profound, triggered by circumstances neither of us could have anticipated or engineered. It's not that I'm grateful for Tyler's betrayal, I clarified, but I am grateful for the clarity it ultimately provided about what matters to me, about how I want to live and work. Exactly. Jackson nodded emphatically. Sometimes disruptive events are the only things powerful enough to break established patterns, to force us out of comfortable compromises. Our conversation shifted to practical matters, the details of his upcoming exhibition, the progress of my legal practice, our shared interest in a community arts initiative. Throughout, I felt a quiet contentment that had been rare during my marriage to Tyler, a sense of authentic alignment between external circumstances and internal values. After lunch, I had time for one more stop before returning to the city, a visit to Sandpiper Cove, now 7 months into its new chapter with Elizabeth and Catherine Parker. Their invitation to stop by any time had initially seemed like social courtesy, but subsequent communications had revealed genuine interest in maintaining connection. 3 months earlier, I'd accepted their invitation for the first time, curious, but apprehensive about how it would feel to experience the property as a visitor, rather than an owner. The experience had proven unexpectedly positive. Seeing the house through their eyes had highlighted continuity rather than loss, evolution, rather than erasure. Today, as I turned onto the familiar coastal road leading to the property, I felt anticipation rather than anxiety. Elizabeth had mentioned recent discoveries during their sensitive updating of the kitchen. Original fixtures hidden behind later renovations, historical details I hadn't uncovered during my own restoration work. Catherine met me at the door, her warm greeting reinforcing the surprising friendship that had developed between us, despite the unconventional circumstances of our connection. "Perfect timing," she said, echoing Jackson's earlier greeting. "Elizabeth just finished organizing the historical materials we found. She's in the study and can't wait to show you." The house felt both familiar and subtly different. The architectural, bones unchanged, the essential character preserved, but small evolutions evident in furnishing arrangements, art selections, books lining shelves. The Parkers had honored the home's historical integrity while making it authentically theirs, exactly the approach I'd hoped for when selling the property. In the study, Elizabeth had arranged a collection of materials on the large oak desk, photographs, letters, newspaper clippings related to the Hardwick family and Sandpiper Cove's early history. "Olivia, thank you for coming." Her enthusiasm for historical research was infectious. "We've made the most remarkable discoveries. Originally, we were just updating plumbing fixtures in the powder room, but when the contractor removed the vanity, we found this hidden compartment in the wall." She gestured toward a small wooden box on the desk. It contained all these materials, what appears to be Eleanor Hardwick Reed's personal archive documenting the house and family. For the next hour, we pored over the collection together. Photographs, showing the property in various stages of its evolution. Correspondence between family members discussing renovations and improvements. Newspaper articles mentioning William Hardwick's shipping business and the home he built to overlook the harbor his vessels frequented. Most fascinating was Eleanor's journal documenting her own restoration of the property in the 1930s, after years of neglect following her father's death. Her words across decades resonated with my own experience. The challenge of balancing preservation with practical improvements, the satisfaction of uncovering original elements, the sense of responsibility toward both the past and future of the space. "It's remarkable how similar your approach was to Eleanor's," Elizabeth observed, comparing notes I'd provided about my renovation choices with Eleanor's journal entries. "You both emphasized authenticity over convenience, craftsmanship over expediency, connection to place over trending styles." The parallels were indeed striking, suggesting something beyond coincidence, perhaps an inherent logic to thoughtful restoration, a natural approach that emerged when one truly listened to a historical structure's needs rather than imposing external preferences upon it. We're thinking of creating a small historical exhibit about the house, Catherine explained. Something that documents its evolution through various owners, highlighting how each contributed to its ongoing story while maintaining its essential character. That's a wonderful idea, I responded sincerely. A way of honoring the property's continuous history rather than isolating any single period as definitive. We'd like to include your restoration as a key chapter, Elizabeth added. Your work bridged a critical gap, preventing potential demolition and establishing a foundation for preservation that will likely extend decades into the future, the Puig. Thought of my contribution being recognized as part of Sandpiper Cove's larger narrative brought unexpected emotion, not pride in personal achievement, but satisfaction in having participated in something meaningful, something that transcended individual ownership or temporary occupation. Before leaving, I walked through the house once more with Catherine, noting thoughtful modifications they'd implemented, sustainable heating systems that reduced environmental impact while preserving historical elements, subtle lighting improvements that respected original fixtures while enhancing functionality, garden restoration that incorporated native plants suited to the coastal environment. On the deck overlooking the ocean, Catherine paused, her expression thoughtful. I hope this isn't awkward to mention, but we ran into Tyler last month at a fundraiser in Portland. I felt a momentary tightening in my chest, then conscious relaxation. Not awkward at all. How was that interaction? Brief but cordial. He mentioned he'd be relocating to Chicago for a new position with his firm's Midwest division. The news was unexpected but not shocking. Tyler had always been ambitious, willing to relocate for career advancement. Without the anchors of marriage or the beach house, there was little keeping him in Oregon. That's probably a positive move for him, I said, meaning it genuinely. Fresh start, new opportunities. Catherine studied me for a moment. You know, when we first learned about the circumstances surrounding the sale of Sandpiper Cove, I wondered if we should feel uncomfortable, like we'd benefited from a painful situation. But meeting you, understanding your approach to the house and its restoration, seeing how you've moved forward, it's clear this outcome was right for everyone involved, including the house itself. Her perception was surprisingly accurate. The sale of Sandpiper Cove hadn't been about revenge or even self-protection. It had been about recognizing when a chapter was complete, when holding on would serve neither the property nor myself. The house needed stewards who appreciated its authentic character. I needed freedom to evolve beyond patterns that no longer served my growth. I believe that too, I told her. Some endings create space for better beginnings, even when they're painful in the moment. As I prepared to leave, Elizabeth presented me with a carefully wrapped package. We wanted you to have this, a token of appreciation for your stewardship of Sandpiper Cove. Opening it, I found a beautifully framed photograph of the house taken during the 1930s, alongside a modern image they'd commissioned showing the property as it appeared after my restoration. The visual comparison highlighted both continuity and evolution, the same essential structure transformed by time, care, and thoughtful intervention. This is incredibly meaningful, I said, genuinely touched by the gesture. Thank you. Driving. Away from Sandpiper Cove for what might be the last time for many months, my new practice and foundation work kept me increasingly busy in the city. I felt none of the regret or nostalgia I might have expected. Instead, I experienced a sense of completion, of cycles properly concluded and new ones thoughtfully begun. The beach house had served its purpose in my journey, not as a possession to acquire and display, but as a catalyst for transformation. a vehicle for rediscovering values and capabilities that had been obscured during years of accommodation and compromise. Tyler had never understood that deeper meaning. For him, Sandpiper Cove had been initially a puzzling hobby, then an inconvenience, and finally, too late, a status symbol he sought to claim without having participated in its creation or appreciated its authentic character. His relationship with Vanessa had followed a similar pattern, initial excitement giving way to complication once reality intruded on fantasy, the forever home lasting barely 3 months before his ownership claims were revealed as baseless, their relationship dissolving shortly thereafter under the weight of practical consequences. I felt no satisfaction in these outcomes, no vindictive pleasure in the collapse of Tyler's carefully constructed narrative. If anything, I felt compassion for the pattern I recognized, his persistent pursuit of external validation, appearance over substance, acquisition over creation, patterns that had characterized our marriage and apparently continued beyond it. My own path had taken a different direction, toward integration rather than compartmentalization, toward authentic alignment between values and actions, toward relationships based on genuine appreciation rather than strategic advantage. The framed photographs from Elizabeth and Catherine now rested on the passenger seat beside me, tangible reminders of continuity across time, of responsibility extending beyond individual ownership, of the possibility that our most meaningful contributions might be those that connect past to future through thoughtful stewardship in the present. As I reached the coastal highway that would take me back to the city, I glanced in the rearview mirror. Sandpiper Cove was no longer visible, obscured by the curve of coastline and the gathering evening mist. Yet its influence remained with me, not as regret for what was lost, but as guidance for what might yet be created. The beach house had never been the destination. It had been the journey, the process of discovery, challenge, transformation that had revealed what truly mattered, what was worth preserving, what deserved to be built upon rather than discarded. That understanding would inform whatever I chose to create next, whether legal frameworks that protected historical properties, restoration guidelines that honored craftsmanship and environmental responsibility, or personal relationships based on mutual respect and authentic appreciation. Tyler had moved his mistress into our beach house, claiming ownership of something he had neither created nor truly valued. I had sold it without telling him, reclaiming not just my legal rights but my authentic voice. But the true resolution wasn't in either of those actions. It was in what followed, the transformed life I was now creating, aligned with rediscovered values, informed by lessons learned through both loss and reclamation. Some journeys couldn't be measured in property acquired or assets divided. Some transformations couldn't be quantified in settlement agreements or legal victories. The most valuable outcomes were often those that couldn't be bought or sold at all: clarity, purpose, integrity, authentic connection. As the coastal landscape gave way to city outskirts, I felt profound gratitude, not for what I had lost or even what I had gained, but for what I had learned. The beach house was gone, but its lessons remained, guiding whatever I might build next on the foundation of that hard-won wisdom. Some endings were really beginnings in disguise. This had been one of them, for Sandpiper Cove, for its new owners, and most importantly, for me. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.